Joining me now is Dr. Jasser. He's a retired U.S. Lieutenant Commander, President of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, and he is the author of the book Battle for the Soul of Islam, an American Muslim's Patriot's Fight to Save His Faith. Dr. Jasser, thank you very much for being here.
Oh, it's great to be with you, Bill. Thanks for having me back.
There are so many things that we could talk about, but I have to start with the news that really sits over the top of everything else, and that is that horrific attack in Manchester not even 48 hours ago. And what intrigued me there is the fact that in Britain and in Europe, there is a reluctance by the police there to say, and the intelligence community, to place blame for this on radical Islamists. And in fact, it ended up being an outburst from a musician, Morrissey. I'm not a particular proponent of caring what artists have to say, but this outburst is germane to our conversation because he put on Facebook, he posted up on Facebook while I reached down for my notes here, he said that, Manchester Mayor Andy Burnham says the attack is the work of an extremist. An extreme what? An extreme rabbit? In modern Britain, everyone seems to be petrified to officially say what we all say in private. Politicians say they're unafraid, but they're never the victims. How easy to be unafraid when one is protected from the line of fire. The people have no such protections. The feeling seems to be, Dr. Jasser, if they say that the guy who blew himself up and murdered those people is of the Muslim faith, thereby condemning the entire Islamic community and inviting a backlash. I really want your reaction to this. Let's talk about that.
Well, I have to tell you, this is why this attitude from the UK, from Europe, this is why they continue to have more and more attacks. It's like trying to prevent drunk driving by ignoring the alcoholism, but just trying to say, well, we need to take the keys away. Well, that might help. But at the end of the day, they're ignoring the substance, which is Islamism, supremacist, theocratic Islam that's the mosques in Britain. The Brexit move, if you will, I think started to reset British nationalism, and I think will be part of the solution. They had a Prime Minister, Cameron, that gave a speech in 2011 that repeatedly identified Islamism and the Islamist global jihadism, as he said in the speech multiple times, as the main problem. Right. But he kept getting pushback from leftists, from those including the ones that ended up voting Sadiq Khan into being the mayor of London, that ultimately have prevented an obstacle from, many of these guys end up being what Patrick Poole and others have called known wolves, not lone wolves, known wolves. Mm-hmm. And the problem is all of our apparatus, even in America, we're still focused at that last stage, which is when they operationalize, they get online or they go to Syria or Libya, as this guy did, and probably learn how to make the bomb. But before he does that, he spent a generation. There's a reason why most of these guys are homegrown, born in Britain, born in Germany, Italy, wherever it is. They're not necessarily the refugees. Most of these are homegrown because of the separatist culture, the underbelly of imams, communities, families that tell them that the West hates them, that conspiracy theories, the misogyny of Islamism is preferable to the freewheeling freedom of the West. All these kind of ideologies that are nonviolent and aren't looked at as precursors of violent jihadism, the nonviolent civilizational jihad, is ignored. And until they start to focus on it and look at it honestly as being precursors, they're going to continue to ignore. And we need, think Cold War, think communism. Yeah. We defeated the Soviets, not by just focusing on the militant Soviets, but by saying, you know what? The underbelly of that is socialism, communist parties of the West. We didn't make them illegal, but we realized that they were the prime breeding ground for Soviet sympathizers. Yeah,
it's been interesting, and as a man who has several friends who are of the Islamic faith, it's been disturbing to me that we've had people on this air, and I understand why they feel this way, okay? But they have said the problem is not radical Islam, the problem is Islam. The problem is the religion of Muslims is violent, and it is dangerous, and it poses a threat to everyone. And unless we acknowledge that people are saying that and talk about this openly like you and I right now, I don't think there's a whole lot more that we can do. I think we risk something far worse developing here. And in fact, in that context, I want to play part of what President Trump said in Saudi Arabia this past weekend, where he made it very clear that the problem with Islam is Islam itself, and they need to do something about it. Guys, we play it. I think it's soundbite number 5.
A better future is only possible if your nations drive out the terrorists and drive out the extremists. Drive them out. Drive them out of your places of worship. Drive them out of your communities. Drive them out of your holy land. And drive them out of this earth.
Your thoughts?
Well, Bill, briefly, let me start by saying, those who believe all of Islam is the problem, any way you look at it, if you look at Islam as a monolith, whether all peaceful and it's not a problem or all a problem, both lead you to sort of the mantra that the Saudis, the establishment, speaks for Islam, when in fact, if you want to solve the problem, we need to say that diversity in Islam is not ethnic diversity, but ideological diversity, that if Islam really needs reform, which I believe the establishment that currently dominates the interpretation of Islam, which are the tyrants he was speaking to in that speech, then we need to reform against them. So, I said at the president's speech, as much as I really liked what he said, I tweeted sarcastically at the time that drive them out, then most of the people in that room should have been driven out of their countries, because they are the primary fuels of radical Islam. We need to speak, like you said, the friend that you have that's Muslim. We are the ones that live in a laboratory where this can be done. It is beyond Orwellian that we are helping and sort of commemorating the building of a counterterrorism center in Riyadh. That's like building a counter-cocaine center in Colombia. It's just not going to happen. They are with us. They are with us against ISIS. But the fuel, up until the point the ISISes are created in the grassroots, the only difference between ISIS and the Saudis is the Saudis are corporate, well-dressed, greased, petro-Islamic leaders who have a way to massage the blasphemy laws in a way that they say they have a control of it. But the intoxicant is the same theocracy. And the place that we need to address this, Manchester should remind everybody that the place to address this, because they're getting radicalized here from the ideas coming from Riyadh, coming from Pakistan and Iran and Egypt, is to build centers led by Muslims in London, in America, in Canada. That's the only solution to modernize the ideas that the president, I think, boldly addressed at that conference.
Well, it's interesting because Oz Sultan, who is a frequent guest on the program, and he and I speak quite frequently, both on air and off the air, has echoed those same concerns, and he went like a step further, because he believes that we are losing the social media war. And that somehow, some way, a united effort, an interfaith network, if you will, needs to counter the kind of propaganda that is being put out there, and the kind of romance on murder and killing that is being put out on social media, that draws these kids into this really, really dark world. I don't know how to do it, so I defer to folks like you. You've got a military background. Do you, number one, agree that we're failing in terms of social media? And what can we do in that regard if we are?
Well, I'll tell you why we're failing. We're failing because the entire approach has been countering violent extremism, as if somehow if you just counter the violence, that you can just work to whack-a-mole our way into peace. No, we have to figure out, just like we did in the Cold War, we were not only working against the Soviets and against communism, we were promoting free markets, promoting liberty, Radio Free Europe. We had a campaign in Eastern Europe beyond the Iron Curtain to try to work with those who want to be free, want to have individual rights. That's what we need to do. There needs to be a Radio Free Islam, Radio Free Saudi, Iran, work with the Green Revolution. You have to speak past these tyrants and speak to what the revolutions of the Middle East wanted, which is a removal from the shackles of dictatorship, because you can't question, you can't reform the ideas that are radicalizing individuals like the Manchester who committed this heinous act. You can't counter those ideas in a prison of a state like Iran or Saudi Arabia You need to have ideas of what we promote. And that social media campaign needs to be led, I think, by almost like a Manhattan Project, like the Cold War, and where we get a commission on radical Islam, as the president promised he would convene, led by Muslims, that includes anti-jihadists, think tanks that are focused on not only what we're against, but promoting what we are for in universal human rights.
That is fantastic. Thank you, Dr. Jasser. We are completely out of time. It's always a pleasure to have you on.